came here for silence. After the war, I thought silence could heal. What noise had broken the roar of engines, the screams that never left my skull? Out here, miles from the nearest town, the wind spoke softer. The pine trees whispered instead of shouted. And for a while, I almost believed peace was something you could bury under enough snow and distance. Atlas and Luna seemed to believe it too. Atlas, steady as a soldier, always walked a few paces ahead, scanning the woods as if guarding invisible borders. Luna followed with restless curiosity, her blue eyes catching every flicker. Together they kept the ghosts away, or so I told myself. But peace is a fragile thing. That afternoon, the air felt wrong, too heavy, too still. The horizon darkened to the color of old bruises. When the storm came, it wasn't just rain. It was thunder that rattled the earth, like artillery fire, tearing through the forest and ripping an ancient oak from its roots. When morning came, the world looked rearranged. Branches mud silence again, but not the same silence. Atlas was already barking at the fallen tree, his paws clawing at something buried beneath the roots. Luna joined him, whining low, ears flat. At first, I thought they'd found a rabbit hole. But then I saw the glint of rusted metal under the dirt, squared, deliberate, impossible. I should have walked away. I should have left the ground undisturbed. But something in me, something old and restless, leaned closer. And that's how it began, the day silence finally spoke back. They say time moves slower when you're alone. Out here, it doesn't just move slow, it barely moves at all. Days blur into one another until even the seasons seem to lose their shape. The forest breathes at its own pace, and you learn to match it, inhale with the morning fog, exhale with the setting Sunday. That's what my life became, a long, quiet inhale that I hoped would never end. The cabin sat on a ridge overlooking the bay. It wasn't much to look at. Faded cedar walls, a roof patched more times than I could count, but it stood firm through wind and snow, and that was enough. Every plank, every dent, every creak in the floorboards carried the memory of the man who built it. My father, a man who never said much, but built things that lasted. I guess that's where I get it from. Most mornings started the same way. I'd wake before dawn when the world still held its breath and step out onto the porch with a mug of coffee. The air was sharp and tasted like pine resin and sea salt. Atlas would already be awake, sitting by the steps like a sentinel, eyes fixed on the dark line of trees. Luna, on the other hand, was pure chaos, stretching, yawning, chasing the fog as if she could catch it. We'd walk the same trail every morning, a narrow dirt path that curved down toward the shoreline. The pines loomed tall and old, their roots knotted like the hands of time itself. Sometimes, if the tide was low, we'd wander all the way to the rocky inlet, where the sea met the earth with a sound like deep, slow breathing. There was something comforting in that rhythm. Waves rising and falling day after day, indifferent to whatever battles men fought above them. It was peace, or the closest thing I'd ever had to it. But peace is strange. It doesn't heal you, not really. It just covers the scars, lets you forget they're there for a while. Then one small crack appears, and all the old ghosts start seeping through again. In town, people had stopped asking about me years ago. They knew me as the quiet veteran who lived by the coast with his dogs. Sometimes, I'd drive into the village to pick up supplies. Coffee nails, propane, nodding politely to faces that no longer expected words. A few old-timers would tip their hats, the kind of silent respect soldiers give to each other long after the uniforms are gone. I appreciated that. Words have a way of getting in the way of truth. At home, my world was simple. Fix what's broken, feed the dogs, cut wood before the frost. I read the same few books over and over, mostly about survival navigation, or the old explorers who thought the world still had edges. I suppose I envied them the certainty of their maps, the belief that somewhere beyond the horizon there was still something worth finding. But my horizon was here, on this strip of rugged coastline, where the trees bowed to the wind. Atlas and Luna didn't seem to mind. They had their own routines. Atlas was disciplined, a soldier's dog without the training. He'd patrol the perimeter of the property like it was his sworn duty, nose to the ground, tail low, always alert. Luna was the opposite, a burst of life, unrestrained and curious. She'd follow Atlas halfway, then get distracted by a bird or a rustling leaf and sprint into the woods. Sometimes I wondered if they represented the two halves of me, the part that still followed orders, and the part that wanted to run until the past couldn't catch up. At night, when the fire burned low and the wind whispered through the pines, I'd sit by the window and listen. The silence out here wasn't empty, it was full of things you couldn't see. The groan of old wood, the rustle of branches, the faint cry of something wild in the distance. The kind of sounds that reminded you how small you were in the grand order of things. Some nights I swore I could hear the sea talking to me. Not in words, but in patterns. The way the waves hit the rocks, the pauses between the crashes, the rhythm of retreat and return. It reminded me of the radio chatter from the desert, those long, static-filled silences, before a voice would finally break through, carrying news that could change everything. I'd try to push the memory away, but it always found its way back, like a tide that never really goes out. One evening I caught myself talking to Atlas and Luna as if they were people. "You two ever think about what comes next?" I asked them, while patching a hole in the porch. Atlas tilted his head, expression unreadable but patient, while Luna wagged her tail as if she already knew the answer. I laughed to myself. It felt good, that small sound of life against the backdrop of so much stillness. That night the air changed. It was subtle at first, a pressure shift, like the world had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. The crickets went quiet. The wind stopped moving. Even the dogs grew still. I stepped outside and felt it. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful anymore. The sky above the ridge had turned an odd color, the edges of the clouds glowing faintly green. Lightning flashed far out over the sea, too distant to hear but bright enough to paint the forest in ghostly light. "Storm's coming," I muttered, mostly to myself. Atlas gave a low growl, almost like agreement. The next morning the air was thick and heavy, as if the world was holding back something inevitable. The radio on the shelf buzzed with static. No music, no forecasts, just the low hum of interference. I tried not to think too much of it. Maine weather was unpredictable. Storms rolled in, rolled out, nothing more. I told myself that. Still, there was something off about that day. The light seemed wrong, too pale, too sharp. Even Luna, who normally begged for attention, stayed close to the porch, ears twitching toward the tree line. Atlas refused to lie down, pacing slowly along the edge of the yard, eyes fixed on something unseen. By afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching me. Not in the way animals do, but with intent. Like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to notice something I'd missed all these years. I busied myself with work, replacing a loose shingle, stacking firewood, clearing the gutters, but the unease stayed. Every hammer strike echoed louder than it should have. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper trying to warn me. As dusk settled, I took the dogs for one last walk. The world had turned still again. Even the ocean sounded muffled, as if wrapped in cotton. I remember thinking how strange it was that peace and dread could wear the same face. We reached the clearing, where the old oak tree stood, a giant weathered thing that had been here longer than the house itself. Its branches spread wide like a guardian's arms, and its roots dug deep into the soil, gripping the earth like it feared being taken away. I'd always admired that tree. It had survived decades of storms, standing exactly where it wanted to be. Atlas stopped first. He sniffed the air, low growl rumbling in his chest. Luna froze beside him, her fur standing on end. I followed their gaze, but there was nothing. Just the tree motionless in the fading light. The air shifted again. A wind came from nowhere, sharp and cold, carrying the faint smell of rain and salt. I looked up and saw the first flash of lightning far out over the bay. The storm was still distant, but the dogs sensed it coming long before I could. I knelt beside them, resting a hand on each of their heads. "It's all right," I whispered. "We've seen worse, haven't we?" Atlas leaned into my hand, but didn't take his eyes off the tree. Luna pressed closer to my leg, her body trembling. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since the desert. An edge of anticipation, the old instinct that says something's coming and you won't be ready for it. We turned back toward the cabin, The wind was picking up now, bending the tall grass flat against the ground. The first drops of rain hit the porch roof like stray bullets. I stoked the fire, made sure the generator was fueled, checked the windows one by one. A soldier's habits never really die. By nightfall, thunder rolled across the coastline like distant artillery. Atlas paced by the door, every muscle alert. Luna whined softly, curling near the hearth. I tried to read, but the words wouldn't hold. My eyes kept drifting to the window, to the silhouette of that oak tree standing against the storm. That's when I saw it, a faint flash of light near the base of the trunk. At first I thought it was lightning, but it didn't fade. It lingered, flickering faintly beneath the soil, like a candle burning underground. Atlas barked, once sharp and urgent. I told myself it was my imagination, stormlights, reflections, anything but what it felt like. Still, I couldn't look away. That was the first crack in the silence. The first sign that peace had never really been peace at all. And though I didn't know it yet, that flicker beneath the tree was more than just a trick of the storm. It was the beginning of everything that would soon come undone. That night, the storm arrived like something ancient, finally waking up. I'd heard plenty of tempests roll across the Maine coast before, but this one felt different. It didn't announce itself with soft rain or a polite rumble. It came all at once, a violent roar that tore through the valley as if the sky had been split open. The first gust slammed against the cabin, hard enough to rattle every loose nail in the walls. The windows screamed in their frames. Atlas barked sharply, a warning more than fear, while Luna pressed against my leg, her fur bristling like static. The storm howled for hours. The sound of it was alive, a chorus of wind, thunder, and something deeper underneath, a low vibration that I could feel in my chest more than hear. Every flash of lightning painted the world outside in blinding white for half a heartbeat. And each time I caught the same glimpse, the silhouette of the old oak, still standing, refusing to bow. I tried to distract myself with routine boiled coffee, checked the fire, tightened the shutters, but the noise made every small movement feel pointless. Nature wasn't just knocking, it was pounding on the door. At some point past midnight, the power flickered and died. The hum of the generator choked, sputtered, then went silent. The only light left was the orange breath of the fireplace and the white bursts outside the windows. The air was thick, heavy with rain and fear. "Stay close," I told the dogs. My voice sounded strange in the chaos, too calm, too steady for what I was feeling. Atlas obeyed immediately, sitting near the door, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the porch. Luna whined, restless, pacing from window to window, ears twitching with every thunderclap. The storm wasn't just noise to her. It was a language, and whatever it was saying, she didn't like it. I stood by the window, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder, the way I used to count artillery strikes in the desert. 1, 2, 3. The flash came before the count could end. A bolt struck somewhere close, too close. The sound that followed wasn't thunder. It was a crack like the earth itself splitting open. The floor shook beneath my boots. Glass rattled. A moment later came the deep groaning sound of wood giving way. Atlas barked again. 1, 2, 3 sharp barks, and then silence. When the thunder faded, a new sound filled the air, a low grinding rumble, the unmistakable sound of something massive collapsing. I stepped outside, shielding my eyes against the rain, and looked toward the ridge where the oak stood. It was gone. Where that ancient tree had stood for generations, there was now only a dark gap and the smell of torn earth. The roots had been ripped clean out of the ground, leaving behind a wound in the landscape, a crater where water was already pooling. Lightning flared again, and for a split second, I saw it clearly, the tree's trunk, lying broken, half buried in mud, and beneath it, something else. Metal. A glint, faint but unmistakable, reflecting the lightning. I blinked, and it was gone, swallowed by darkness. When the storm finally passed, it left behind a silence even heavier than before. The world smelled of salt and soil and smoke. The trees dripped with exhaustion. Every surface was slick and shining as if the land had been freshly forged. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I took a shovel and walked up to where the oak had fallen. Atlas trotted ahead, cautious, but curious. Luna bounded beside him, nose pressed to the ground. The air was still damp, the ground's soft footprints sinking deep into the mud. Up close, the damage was worse than I expected. The oak had been uprooted entirely, its roots twisted into the air like the veins of a corpse. The earth around it had cracked open, revealing layers of soil that hadn't seen sunlight in 100 years. And there, half buried in the dirt, was what I'd glimpsed the night before. A large iron hatch, roughly the size of a door, its surface covered in rust and moss. A handle protruded from one side, thick with grime, but still intact. I stood staring at it for a long time. It didn't make sense. There were no records of bunkers or basements on this land. I'd checked the property files years ago. My father had built the cabin himself with his own hands. He never mentioned anything like this. Atlas circled the hatch, nose low, tail stiff. He barked once, then stepped back as if the thing smelled wrong. Luna let out a low whine, pacing around it in uncertain loops. "Easy," I said, though. My own voice betrayed the unease crawling up my spine. I wiped the mud away from the handle with my sleeve. The metal underneath was cold and solid. I tried to lift it, it didn't budge. Locked or just stuck from years underground. That should have been the end of it. A sane man would have covered it back up, told himself it was some old root cellar from the 1800s, and left it alone. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it's all you have left. I fetched my tools from the shed, crowbar, hammer, flashlight, and got to work. The dog sat a few yards back, watching silently. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed in the morning air, sharp and ugly against the calm that followed the storm. It took nearly an hour before the rust gave way. When the hatch finally creaked open, a hiss of stale air escaped, cold and dry. The smell hit me first, old iron dust, something chemical beneath it all. I shined the flashlight down. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. The walls were concrete, lined with pipes and old wiring. It wasn't a root cellar. It was something built with purpose, deliberate, secret. My pulse quickened. I felt that old tremor in my hands, the one I thought I'd left behind in the desert. Atlas growled low, not in anger but warning. Luna stepped closer, ears flat, tail lowered. "Stay here," I told them, though we all knew they wouldn't. I took one cautious step down. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the space itself had been waiting for someone to disturb it. My flashlight beam flickered across the walls, revealing faded stencils, letters, and numbers too worn to read. A few steps later, I found the floor, a narrow corridor leading into a small chamber. The room was empty except for a metal table bolted to the ground and a single wooden crate resting on top. Dust coated everything like ash. I wiped the crate clean with my hand and saw faint markings on the lid. Property of U.S. Army Signal Corps, 1945. My heart stuttered. That was impossible. I pried the crate open. Inside, wrapped in rotted canvas, were two objects: a reel-to-reel tape recorder and a small leather journal. Both looked untouched by time, preserved by the dry air. I reached for the journal first. The cover was cracked, but intact. On the first page, written in neat, deliberate handwriting, was a name I hadn't seen since I was a child. My father's. The air felt suddenly thinner. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Behind me, Atlas barked sharply once, then again. Luna growled low and uncertain. Something echoed deeper in the tunnel, a soft, metallic clang, like a door shifting somewhere in the dark. I froze, listening. The sound didn't come again. I should have left right then. Closed the hatch. Forgotten the past. But that's not how stories like mine work. Some secrets aren't buried to be forgotten. They're buried to be found. And standing there in that cold, silent bunker, I realized the storm hadn't just torn down a tree. It had uncovered a part of me I'd spent my whole life trying to bury. For a long moment, I just stood there, half in the bunker, half out, listening. The world above had gone utterly still. No wind, no rain, not even the creak of trees settling after the storm. It was the kind of silence that made you think the world was waiting for you to make the next move. Atlas stayed by the hatch, one paw on the edge, ears tilted forward. Luna hesitated halfway down the stairs, her breath fogging in the cold air. I could hear the soft scrape of her claws, on the metal steps, a rhythm that somehow made the darkness seem deeper. I took another breath and descended fully. The beam from my flashlight cut through the dust, catching the motes that hung suspended like ghosts. The air was stale, dry metallic, the smell of a place that had been sealed for decades. My footsteps echoed faintly, absorbed by the thick concrete walls. Every sound felt amplified. My breathing, the distant drip of water somewhere. The low growl Atlas made whenever the beam caught on something unexpected. The small chamber at the bottom looked older than it had any right to. The floor was smooth gray, marked by faint shoe prints, too small, too sharp-edged to be mine. I crouched and ran my hand across them. Not recent, but not ancient either. I turned the light back toward the table. The crate sat open, its contents spread before me, like offerings from another life. The journal, the tape recorder, a few rolls of film sealed in rusted tins. The label Signal Corps glared up at me like an accusation. I opened the journal again. The first few pages were filled with tidy handwriting, my father's, no doubt about it. The dates were all from 1,945 months before the end of the war. Some of the entries were brief coded, even contact made. Operation extended. Directive from above, silence at all costs. Others were more personal. Lines about doubt, about orders that feel wrong, about what we found in the tunnels. The words bled into each other in my head. Part history, part confession. There was a page near the middle, where the ink had smeared, as if written in haste. They said it was about protection. But you can't protect what was never meant to exist. I closed the book, my fingers trembling slightly. Protection, silence, tunnels. None of it made sense, not yet. I turned my attention to the tape recorder. It was heavy, mechanical, built like a tank. The reels were still threaded, though one had snapped. I found a fresh power cell stored beside it, military issue labeled 1950. Someone had been here long after my father's time. That realization hit me harder than I expected. Whoever they were, they knew about this place, maybe even used it. I fiddled with the machine until the reels finally spun. Static filled the room, a harsh, crackling hum that seemed to crawl under my skin. Then, beneath it, faint voices emerged. Recording, Bunker 9. File transfer incomplete. A man's voice, calm but strained. Not my father's. Someone else. Then another sound. Distant at first. Then clearer, like metal striking stone. The voice returned, lower, now urgent. We were never supposed to open it. If anyone finds this, the tape ended in a burst of static so sharp it made Luna whimper. Atlas barked once, echoing through the bunker. I froze again, every sense on edge. That last line, we were never supposed to open, it hung in the air like a curse. I swept the flashlight across the walls, following the pipes and wiring. Near the far corner, a section of the concrete looked different, newer, smoother. Someone had patched it, poorly. The paint didn't match. I moved closer. The beam caught something faintly scratched into the surface, symbols, maybe letters worn by time. I brushed the dust away. It wasn't writing. It was a series of hash marks, 5 vertical lines, crossed by one diagonal slash repeated over and over again, like someone had been counting days. That's when I noticed the sound so soft, I almost thought I imagined it. A hollow echo deep behind the wall, as if there was another chamber on the other side. I tapped the concrete with my knuckles. Solid. Tapped again, lower. Hollow. I found a hammer in the crate, and hesitated. Every instinct told me to stop, to leave whatever secrets this place held buried. But curiosity, or maybe guilt, wouldn't let me. The first strike sent a small cloud of dust into the air. The second broke through the plaster coating. By the third, I saw it metal again beneath the wall. A door. Smaller than the hatch above, but clearly sealed shut from the inside. Atlas began pacing, low growl rumbling in his chest. Luna's ears flattened. She pressed against my leg. I rested my hand on her head, my heartbeat echoing the hammer's rhythm. I found a small lever near the edge of the metal door. It resisted at first, then gave with a sharp click. A draft of air escaped, colder, sharper, carrying a smell I couldn't place. I pulled the door open slowly, Behind it was a narrow crawlspace barely tall enough to stand in. My flashlight beam shook as it scanned the interior. There were metal shelves lining the wall, filled with glass jars and old chemical containers, all covered in dust. On the far side sat a metal locker, its door hanging ajar. Inside were photographs, black and white, curled with age, and a set of military dog tags tied together with a faded strip of cloth. The name stamped into the tag wasn't my father's. It was someone else's, someone I'd never heard of. The photo above it showed 3 men in uniform, standing beside what looked like a large, circular object, part machine, part structure, embedded deep in rock. The background wasn't Europe. It wasn't anywhere I recognized. Beneath the photo, written in faint pencil, were 3 words: Project Nightroot, Silent Witness. The beam trembled in my hand. I don't know how long I stood there staring at those words, feeling the weight of the earth pressing down above me. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Atlas barked again, pulling me back to the present. Luna pawed at my leg, whining, her body tense. Somewhere in the darkness, a soft, metallic creak echoed the sound of something shifting, old hinges groaning awake after too many years. I turned toward the sound light flicking across the pipes and the concrete. Nothing moved, but the air felt alive again, charged, watchful. And that's when it hit me. Whatever my father and those men found down here, they didn't just bury it. They tried to seal it away. And by opening this place, I had just undone their work. I didn't sleep that night. Even after I sealed the hatch and covered it with the tarp, I could still feel the weight of the bunker pressing beneath the soil, like the land itself was holding its breath again. The journal sat open on my desk, the words swimming under the flicker of a single lantern. We were never supposed to open it. Atlas lay near the door, but his ears kept twitching toward the window. Luna, usually restless, refused to move from my side. The storm had passed, but something heavier had taken its place, the feeling that I wasn't alone out here anymore. At dawn, I heard the truck before I saw it. The sound cut through the fog like a blade, steady, mechanical, deliberate. I stepped out onto the porch as the vehicle crawled up the muddy path, headlights dim behind the mist. A woman stepped out. She wore a dark coat, mud up to her knees, and held a folded map in one hand. Her face was pale, sharp, and watchful, the kind of person who didn't come here by accident. "You're Jonas Keene," she said. Not a question. I nodded slowly. "You've got the advantage, ma'am." "My name's Ayla Vance," she said. "I believe you found something that belongs to my family." Her voice was calm, but her eyes, those eyes had the same alertness I'd seen in soldiers who'd walked too close to death. I said nothing, only motioned for her to step under the porch. She looked past me toward the fallen oak and the mound of disturbed earth. Her expression tightened like she'd expected it. "I knew it," she murmured. "You opened it. How do you know about that place?" I asked. She unfolded the map, an old survey of the region dated 1951. In the corner, someone had scrawled Bunker 9, Nightroot, the same words I'd seen in the photograph. "My grandfather worked here after the war," she said. "He disappeared in 1952. They told us it was an accident, a landslide, but my mother always believed it was a cover-up. She said they buried the truth out here." The words tightened my chest. "Your grandfather's name?" She looked at me carefully. "Major Thomas Vance." I froze. That name was in my father's journal. Page 47. Underlined twice. The wind picked up between us, cold and sharp. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I turned, went back inside, and returned with the journal. I set it on the porch rail. Her eyes widened. She reached out but didn't touch it, as though it might burn. "Where did you get this?" "It was in the bunker," I said. "Along with a tape. Your grandfather's voice might be on it." She finally looked at me, then really looked. "You shouldn't have gone down there," she whispered. "There are people who still don't want that place open." I almost laughed. "Yeah, I'm starting to believe that." That's when Atlas growled low and deep. A black SUV was crawling up the ridge road. 2 men stepped out, both wearing gray parkas with no insignia. They moved with purpose, not curiosity. Ayla's face went pale. "Do you know them?" I asked. She shook her head. but I know what they want. The men started calling out before they reached the porch. Mr. Keene, we're with the Department of Historical Preservation. We heard you might have uncovered restricted property. We just need to take a quick look. Government, maybe? But not the kind that asked politely. Atlas barked sharp and loud. Luna's fur bristled. I stepped off the porch and met them halfway down the path. This is private land, I said. You're not taking a look at anything. The taller one smiled the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. You've found something classified, Mr. Keene. Best if you let professionals handle it. Behind me, Ayla whispered, Don't let them see the book. I wasn't planning to. The man's smile faded. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I met his gaze and said nothing. The silence stretched thin, just long enough for the second man to take one step too close. Atlas lunged forward, snapping inches from his leg. The man stumbled back, cursing. That was enough. They retreated to their SUV, but not before the tall one turned and said quietly, You have no idea what you've opened, Mr. Keene. Walk away while you still can. They left in a spray of mud tires, carving angry lines into the path. Ayla exhaled shakily. They'll be back. I know. We went inside. I placed the journal and the tape recorder on the table. She stood over them, as if staring at a grave. They all signed something, she said softly. Your father, my grandfather, and a third man, Julian Croft. He funded the operation. He's still alive. I looked up sharply. Alive. She nodded. Living under a different name. He owns half the valley now. If those men were his, he knows you have the proof. I stared down at the worn cover of my father's journal, the ink-stained pages, the ghostly signature. Everything suddenly connected, the lies, the bunker, the missing men. It wasn't just a relic from the war. It was a wound. And the people who made it were still bleeding others to keep it closed. Outside, thunder murmured again, distant this time, but not gone. The storm had returned, only now it had faces, and they were coming. The next night, the storm returned. Not from the sky this time, but from men. By dusk, the fog had swallowed the valley again, turning every tree into a ghost. Ayla stayed inside, pacing near the window. The journal lay open between us, the tape recorder beside it, still warm from replay. I'd listened to the voice a dozen times that day, calm, broken, trembling, near the end. If this ever surfaces, the man had said, it means we failed to contain it. They'll come for the record for anyone who knows. And now they were coming. Atlas sensed it before we did. He stood near the porch tail, stiff eyes trained on the tree line. Luna pressed close to Ayla's ears, pinned a low growl rumbling in her throat. Then the faint hum of engines reached us. More than one. 3 vehicles, I said quietly. Maybe 4. Ayla's hand tightened on the back of the chair. Croft. I nodded. He's not sending men this time. He's coming himself. The world outside dimmed as the first headlights broke through the fog. The old oak's shattered trunk gleamed wet in the beams, a wound that refused to close. I felt the same inside me. I told Ayla to pack the journal and the tape into her bag. If anything happens, you take the dogs and head west along the trail. There's an old ranger road that leads to the cliffs. Keep moving. Don't look back. She shook her head. I'm not leaving you. You don't owe me that. I owe my grandfather the truth. Her voice was steady, eyes fierce. I almost smiled. War had a way of finding the brave, even in the quiet ones. The engines stopped. Car doors slammed. 4 silhouettes stepped out, 3 men in dark coats, and 1 older figure leaning on a cane. Even from a distance, I recognized him. Julian Croft. He didn't look like a monster, just a tired man who'd traded his soul for too many deals. But I'd learned that evil rarely wore fangs. It smiled politely and asked for cooperation. Mr. Keene, he called out, his voice carried smooth through the mist. You've found something that belongs to the past. I'm here to take it off your hands before it becomes dangerous. Dangerous? For who, I asked. He smiled faintly. For everyone, if misunderstood. I think we both know the danger isn't in misunderstanding, I said, stepping forward. It's in silence. The men behind him shifted. One had a rifle, though he kept it low, not yet raised, but ready. Atlas growled the sound, deep enough to vibrate through the porch. Croft sighed. I knew your father. He wanted this buried same as me. You think you're doing something noble, Mr. Keene, but all you'll do is reopen a wound that never healed. He didn't want it buried, I shot back. He wanted it told. He just didn't live long enough to do it. Croft's eyes flickered just for a moment, and I saw it guilt or maybe fear. You don't understand what you're meddling with. Some truths destroy lives. Then maybe they should. He gave a small nod, as if that was the answer he'd expected. Then he said quietly, "Take it from them." The world exploded into motion. Ayla ducked as the first shot shattered the cabin window. Atlas lunged forward with a roar that didn't sound like any dog I'd ever heard. I fired back one shot too, the sound deafening in the fog. The men scattered for cover behind the vehicles, flashes of light cutting through the mist. Luna barked wildly, circling Ayla, driving her toward the back door. The air reeked of gunpowder and wet pine. I moved toward the fallen oak, using its trunk as cover, heart pounding like a drumbeat from an old war I thought I'd left behind. Croft's voice cut through the chaos. "You can't protect ghosts, Keene." "Maybe not," I shouted back, "but I can make damn sure they're heard." Atlas leapt at one of the men as he tried to flank the cabin. They went down hard, a blur of motion and sound. I fired again, hitting the other's shoulder. He screamed, vanished into the dark. The fog thickened, turning the forest into a maze of breath and echo. I could barely see Ayla through the haze, running toward the back trail with Luna on her heels. I started to follow, and then I saw Croft. He stood by the stump of the oak cane in hand, eyes locked on me. "You think your father was a hero?" he called. "He signed the same order I did. He helped bury it. You think he wanted you to dig it up?" The words struck deeper than any bullet. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. Croft stepped closer, rain dripping from his coat. "He wasn't protecting the truth, Jonas. He was protecting you." I raised my gun, hands trembling. Then he failed. A flash of lightning split the sky. The sound followed instantly, a crack so loud it felt like the world had shattered. The tree behind Croft groaned and fell, struck clean by the bolt. He stumbled back, eyes wide. Atlas appeared out of the fog, blood on his fur, growling low. Croft raised his cane like a weapon. For a moment, time held its breath again, the same stillness I'd known before every firefight. When the world waits to see who breaks first. Then I fired. The shot echoed through the valley, swallowed by thunder. Croft dropped to his knees, clutching his chest, staring at me as if seeing something he finally understood. He whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the rain spoke, slow, deliberate, cleansing the dirt and blood from the ground. Atlas limped toward me, pressing his head against my knee. Luna emerged from the trail moments later, whining softly, Ayla behind her, clutching the journal to her chest. "It's over," she said. I looked out over the field, the fallen oak, the broken ground, the hatch half buried in mud. "No," I said quietly. "It's just uncovered. We buried Croft beneath the same soil that had hidden his sins." Ayla wanted to destroy the journal to end the cycle, but I couldn't. Some truths aren't meant to vanish, no matter how much they cost. When we finally left the cabin, dawn was breaking. The fog thinned, the light cutting through it like forgiveness. Atlas limped beside me, Luna close on his flank. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke and something else. Freedom. I looked back, one last time. The cabin stood small against the rising sun, scarred but still standing. The storm had passed, but its echo would stay in me forever. And maybe that's what truth really is, not light or salvation, but the thunder that reminds us the sky still remembers what we've done. Morning came slow, like the world itself was exhausted. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, but the smell of wet earth lingered. Every surface shimmered, the grass, the gravel, the splintered remains of the oak. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a silence that felt different. Not empty this time, but full of everything that had happened, full of everything that couldn't be undone. Ayla stood near the porch, her coat soaked, the journal clutched tight in her hands. She hadn't said a word since we buried Croft. Neither had I. There wasn't much left to say. The truth had been spoken, and it had cost enough already. Atlas limped across the yard, his fur matted with dried mud, but his eyes steady, unbroken. Luna walked beside him, head low, tail brushing his side as if to guide him forward. Watching them, I thought about all the things that survive storms, not because they're stronger, but because they refuse to let go. I poured coffee into 2 tin mugs and handed one to Ayla. She nodded her thanks but didn't drink. Her gaze was fixed on the ridge, where the hatch lay half buried under broken roots and soil. The earth was already closing over it again, reclaiming what was stolen from its sleep. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. I took a long breath. The question lingered in the air like smoke. "I'll send copies of the journal and the recording to the press," I said finally. "Let the truth go where it needs to. The rest, I'll leave here." She looked at me, a hint of sorrow, or maybe respect in her eyes. "You're not coming back, are you?" I shook my head. "Some places don't let you stay once you've woken them." We stood in silence for a while, listening to the waves far beyond the trees. The sea had returned to its calm rhythm, inhale, exhale, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. The world never truly goes back to what it was. Ayla left that afternoon. Before she went, she placed her grandfather's dog tags on the porch rail. "For you," she said, "to remind you that not all silence is betrayal." Then she was gone, her figure swallowed by the fog that always seemed to guard the edge of this land. When the sun began to dip, I packed what little I owned, a few books, some tools, the old photo of my father and me when I was 10. I took one last walk down to the oak. The roots sprawled like veins across the mud, and I could almost imagine the heartbeat of the earth beneath them. Atlas sat beside me, Luna curled on his other side. Together we watched the horizon turn gold. "You remember the first storm," I said softly. "You knew it was coming before I did. You always do." Atlas tilted his head, ears flicking at the sound of my voice. Luna whined, gently pressing her muzzle into my hand. I smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The wind picked up then, not fierce, not warning, just a steady breath moving through the pines. It carried with it the scent of salt and rain, the same wind that had once terrified me. Now it felt like something else, a benediction, a whisper that said it was time. Before leaving, I locked the cabin door, though I knew no one would come. I left the key under the porch, beside the old hammer I'd used to open the hatch. The earth could take care of its own secrets now. As we walked down the trail toward the cliffs, the light changed. The fog thinned, revealing a sky streaked with orange and pale blue. The sea glimmered in the distance, restless yet eternal. Atlas limped but kept pace. Luna ran ahead, her bark echoing faintly against the stones. For the first time since the war, I felt something close to peace, not the fragile kind I'd tried to build in isolation, but the kind that comes from acceptance, from knowing that silence doesn't have to mean forgetting. I stopped at the ridge and looked back one last time. The cabin stood small and still against the line of trees, the smoke from its chimney fading into the morning air. The same wind that had once ripped through my world now brushed my face like a promise. The same silence that had once haunted me now felt sacred. When I finally turned away, the dogs followed without a sound. The storm had passed. The truth had spoken. And the man I'd been, the one who came here for silence, was gone with it. The day I left, the wind still moved through the old pines. But this time the silence wasn't fear, it was freedom.